Hi, I'm Brian Crombie, and we're going to be talking on the Brian Crombie Show. We're going to be talking about politics, arts, business, and social issues on the Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV. Well, happy Canada Day, everyone. This is Brian Crombie on Canada One TV. I've got a real pleasure for you tonight. I've got my mom, Flora Crombie, who is I think, an expert in art and art history. She has been a docent at the National Gallery of Art. At least she took school children through sort of art exploratory lessons with art from the National Gallery of Art. She was a docent at the Art Gallery of Ontario. She's got an art and archaeology background academically, and she's a wonderful mom and a great person. And so I thought that it would be special on Canada Day to have her tell us a little bit about art that speaks about Canada. We've talked previously about art appreciation. We've talked about art for Easter. We've talked about art for Mother's Day. So now it's art from Canada Day. Flora Crombie, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Happy Canada Day.
Same to you, my dear.
Thank you. So what are we going to do first?
Well, I want to start with a picture that is not of Canada. It is done by a Canadian, and it will be the only, no, not that one, sorry, that one. The only one I'll show you from the 1800s, it's actually France. And I'm showing it to you partly so that you will get a comparison to the Canadian pictures we're going to look at later. Bremner was one of many young Canadian artists and American artists who left North America to go to France, particularly to Paris in the 1880s and 90s. And he came back to Montreal and presented this as sort of his academic picture. There's nothing wrong with it. I love the picture. It's sweet. And it's sort of springtime, three little girls on a hillside collecting flowers. One little girl is knitting, actually. But it doesn't look like Canada. He presented this as sort of his diploma piece, you might say, to the Art Association in Montreal. And they hired him immediately, and he taught art for something like over 35 years in Montreal and had a great influence. He was one of the ones that kind of brought French art, you could say, to Canada. But I thought what I'd like to do is start an adventure, Brian. We can't go today because we're isolated.
Right.
So in our imagination, let's go out to the West Coast. This is by Emily Carr, and it's called Sky. An amazing picture by Emily Carr. But imagine you've been driving through Vancouver Island. You come through Cathedral Grove and the darkness of the trees, and you're on the shore at Tofino, say, and you're looking out and you're seeing the whole world. Practically, you feel as if you can almost see Japan. Huge, huge sky. Emily Carr herself said, woods and trees are big out west, and you can't squeeze them down. Now, her story is similar in a way to Bremner's in that she did study art in North America. She traveled up and down the West Coast on a mission boat, making a record of the totem poles and the Indian life, shall we say, of the Haidas, etc. And she went to France with her sister, came back and had a show in Vancouver. I think it was like 1915, and it was a disaster. They didn't like her pictures. The results were poor. She didn't sell anything. So she gave up, packed up, went back to Victoria, built a house that would take boarders, and she started doing other things. For 5 years, she didn't paint at all. And then in 1920, Eric Brown, who was the director at the National Gallery in Ottawa and putting on an exhibition of West Coast artists, managed to get her a CNR pass so she could come to Ottawa to see this exhibition. And she did. And she met up with Lauren Harris and a couple of members of the group of 7. And she and Lauren Harris really struck up a friendship. He looked at her work and he said, well, why are you concentrating on this native stuff? He said, you've got the impulse, you've got the techniques, Those two started a correspondence that went on for about 8 years, and he was really her mentor. On her way back out west, she stopped in Toronto and met the other members of the Group of Seven, and she actually did exhibit with them in 1930. I don't know how many people realize she wasn't part of the Group of Seven, actually, ever, but she learned an awful lot. I think this kind of thing came from Lauren Harris.
I love the colors in this.
But feel the whole earth lifting up to the sky. I mean, she's barely showing you the bottom. It is tied to the landscape, but that great sweeping motion reminds me a little bit of some of the Van Goghs with the swirling air above the landscape. You sort of feel the creator is shown in this creation kind of thing. She was a very spiritual woman. And I just love the swirling feeling of it. She'd found a technique of thinning out her oil paint with gasoline. Beautiful show. Now look at the next one. Okay, Lauren Harris took a trip out west. It's the first time that he'd seen the mountains. Now, he'd seen the mountains in Europe. He came from a family of money, and he could travel a lot. He'd done a lot of studying of art in Canada. But again, he had to go to Europe, study what was going on there, picked up some of the Impressionists, picked up something from the Surrealists, every school of art that was active in Europe at that time. He came back to Canada with lots of ideas. And then he went out west and saw the mountains. This is Maligne Lake. Beautiful picture.
Have you been there?
I've been there. I've actually paddled in Maligne Lake, and it is icy, icy cold. It's a beautiful colored lake. But the way the mountains are, it tricks you. You paddle into the wind, headed up the lake, and you think it's going to be a great trip back, and you turn around and you find out, lo and behold, you're paddling into the wind again, coming back down. Okay, so that's a couple of ideas of how Canadian artists saw Canada. Then on your way back, you might come through Edmonton. 3 hours about east of Edmonton, you'd hit Cold Lake. Cold Lake is the home of Alex Janvier. He is a Denny. He's a product of residential schools. I think he said he was 6 years old when he was taken to a residential school. But he loved colors and drawing, and they discovered at the school that he could paint and he could make almost poster designs for the school. So every Friday he was allowed out of school, given colors, given colored pencils, and he made pictures that the school would post as works from their students. And he was fortunate enough through his contacts to be given a commission to do this painting in the ceiling of the Museum of History. You'll have to come all the way to Ottawa if you want to see it. It's actually in the Museum of History across the river in Gatineau. But right now I've discovered there's a virtual tour of it on Facebook, and they actually explain it. It's huge.
This is in the ceiling.
This is in the ceiling.
My gosh, the colors are so incredibly vibrant.
It is gorgeous. It's in a kind of dome above the chair or the stairwell at the end of the Great Hall. So it's 7 stories above the floor. You look up at this huge thing. It's like 60 feet across. Like, what do they say? 19 meters from side to side in diameter. It's hard to explain. You'd almost have to go online to read what they say about it. The center part, he has the medicine wheel, magic thing. All of the folded, pleated parts in the center are supposed to be all the nations of the world. And the outside part, 5,000 years of development of mankind. And he does see hope at the end of it. But in addition to these straight lines, then you've got these lovely, long, sort of sinuous curves. So here's another way of looking at Canada. Now let's go further east to Manitoba. Our next artist is Kurlik. He actually was born in northern Alberta to a farming family who discovered that northern Alberta was not the best place in the world to be doing farming. And when they got a chance, they moved to a more profitable farming area closer to Winnipeg in Manitoba. Kurelek grew up on that farm in a small town, came to Toronto to the Ontario College of Art, as it was called then, graduated from that, went to Europe, painted. Actually, he fell into a real fit of depression and I think was hospitalized for a couple of years. But when he came back to Canada, he got a job with an art dealer in Toronto and spent time, a number of years there, framing pictures, making frames, and painting. And all of the things that he painted were his memories of his happy times in this small town in Manitoba. This is called Manitoba Party. The tent, the painting itself is owned by the National Gallery, and I love it. It's big, it's this gorgeous big orange colored tent. You can see it's been erected right at the edge of the woods. You can see the woods right through the gapping in the back of it. And it's a big party. They're expecting a lot of guests. They're just beginning to line up outside. They don't have enough chairs for the number of people.
Sure
so they've spaced the chairs well apart and put planks between them to add extra seating.
Oh, right.
Right in the center, if you follow the pole down, you'll see there's a big barrel.
Yeah.
I think they're about to tap the beer barrel.
Yeah.
The tables are loaded up with food. There's a makeup orchestra to the right of the tent.
Okay, hold it. So you've got a saxophone, you've got an accordion. What's the guy doing? Is it like a xylophone?
I don't know. There's a great variety. I can't see them all on my screen, but you could probably see more than I can. And behind them, there's a group of kids.
Yep.
And they look as if they're about to do some mischief. In fact, if you look very carefully, I think there's one little boy trying to steal a tart from his mom on the table right down in the front corner. So a lot of his pictures were from happy days in Manitoba.
Right.
So Canadian artists doing pictures of Canada from memory. So what do we like to do in July?
Suntan.
Go to the beach?
Go to the beach.
Go to the beach. Okay, Alex Colville actually was a German art critic who said that the best realist painter of the Western world was Alex Colville.
Oh, really?
Colville graduated from Mount Allison University with a degree in art in, I think, 42, and immediately joined the Army. After 2 years in the Army, he was commissioned as a war artist. When he got out, he went back to Mount Allison, was hired into their art department, and taught there until 1963, when he was making enough from his paintings that he could retire. Now, realism. Well, yes and no. Colville's paintings are very, very realistic, but they're actually put together by him. What I mean is he carried a little sketch pad around with him, and when he saw something he liked, he'd make a sketch of it. And it might not appear in a painting for 5 or 6 years later. Pictures like this that have a woman in them, it's usually his wife. Very often the man is himself. When he starts to do the actual picture, he covers the whole canvas in small sort of 1-inch squares and decides exactly where he's going to put each little piece. He knows exactly where to put the horizon line. He knows where every little cloud should go to sort of balance out the sky. Have a look at the man. You see the way he's kind of balanced down, we'd say, on his haunches.
Yep.
He's not going to stay in that position for very long, is he?
No.
What's he doing? Is he telling his wife, you need another dose of sunscreen or you're getting sunburned or something?
He's saying you look beautiful.
Very often there is some sort of message some hidden something. We look at his pictures and we think, what exactly is going on here? Beautifully, beautifully realistic.
Yep.
He paints very, very slowly.
Well, and
Tiny, tiny little brushes.
The definition on the guy's back is incredible.
Yeah. But he only paints things that he knows, things around his own home, things in New Brunswick, things that he's very, very familiar with. The next one I put in kind of as a joke because so many people right now are walking dogs on leashes.
Yep.
I walk a dog with my daughter practically every afternoon on a leash, but we get to a field, we let her off leash, and wow, that burst of enthusiasm. I can run, great desire to be free and take a run.
Don't we all?
Unusual because it's a very, very asymmetrical picture. He's put this dog way off to one side. Interesting kind of curve.
But if it was
actually,
you wouldn't get the sense of the speed and the power.
Yeah, oh yeah. But a thrill of motion, a thrill of being able to run, of being free to take off and enjoying it so much. You know? Okay, next picture. We're going to a group in the 60s in London, Ontario. The area was called, I guess, or the group, Regionalists, and Greg Canoe kind of headed it up. In fact, he started a magazine, a monthly production called Region. And he was a bicyclist, actually, traveled the roads around London on his bicycle. So a lot of what you see in his painting is sort of a break from what he called colonialism.
Right.
I think he learned a lot from Americans. He'd gone to an art school in London. He had quite a dynamic way that he managed to gather a group of young artists together. He did a huge painting of the London Hospital, and about half of the painting, the bottom half of the painting, is covered in print. I've never been able to figure out what it's all about. But I like this because I can sort of imagine myself off a highway, on a byway, you might say, just enjoying the countryside. This is Ontario, around the countryside around London, Ontario.
Right. Beautiful.
Farmland. I think we've actually got it.
Of the farm that your mother was born on.
Mm-hmm. Could be, could be. Now the next one is by a man who was part of that group, Jack Chambers. And when he studied also at the same school that Greg Canoe had been at, and he went off to London, was in London, I think, for about 3 years studying art, came back. But when I looked at this, I thought, how many of us on a holiday have been on a long motor trip?
Yep. Driving to Ottawa.
We come back and we see 401 and we see the cutoff to 401 that's going to take us to our home, and you're happy. You know, east, west, home's best kind of thing.
Yep.
I think a lot of what Jack Chambers did when he came back to London from his stay was, this is the country I love. This is my home. And also about this time, he was diagnosed with a very bad type of cancer. So he knew that he didn't have more than a few years left to live. But he became a real regionalist in his painting. So if this is realism, this is a brand of realism that we would call a regional realism.
I think the size of the shadow of the cement truck suggests it's late afternoon, so getting close to the end of the day, no?
Mm-hmm. But haven't you felt that when you've been away for a while and you come home and, oh, this is 401? And I think anybody that's traveled in, say, Africa or India is so relieved to find that you can drive almost anywhere in Canada on good highways, coast to coast.
No question. Okay, Mom, we're going to take a break for some messages, and we're
Okay.
going to come back in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Hour on Canada One TV. This is a special Canada Today show with my mom, Flora Crombie, who is a art and archaeology expert and a wonderful lady. And she has been a docent at the Art Gallery of Ontario. She has taken paintings out of the National Gallery of Art in Ottawa into elementary schools to teach kids how to appreciate art. We've done a couple of shows in the past, and now she's sharing with us what she thinks is some of the best art for Canada. So, Mom, how are you?
I'm fine, but I must tell you, I could have taken twice as many pictures as I brought here today. It's so hard to pick and choose.
I'm surprised you don't have any that are of cities. You've got one of a highway here, but none of cities. Anyway, what's this next one?
Because I think when you are on a holiday, you want to get out of the city very often.
Ain't that true?
Okay, we're going to have a look at Norval Morrisseau. A man who was called Picasso of the North.
The Castle of the North.
Yep.
Picasso of the North.
Picasso of the North. No, he did go to a residential school, but only for a couple of years. When he went back to the reservation, he was raised by his grandparents. His grandmother apparently was a very devoted Catholic, and she took him to a church that had beautiful stained glass windows. And he said that he thinks that's probably why he started outlining so many things in black. The memory of the stained glass with the dark leaded surrounds of the stained glass. But he loved to draw, he loved to paint. And I think perhaps there are so many native legends in his paintings, we can't really interpret them all. Now, he did get a commission from an art dealer in Toronto to do a mural at Expo 67 in a pavilion. I think it was called Pavilion of Native Canadians or something like that. So back in 1967, suddenly Canada saw his art. Surprise. Lots of bright color.
Yeah, very bright.
When David Johnson was Governor General, he had a very large mural in his reception room. Excuse me.
Well, it's just it's so beautiful, and the fish and the eagle, and I'm not sure what the circles are in behind.
No, you have to kind of interpret your own, or just enjoy the designs.
Yep.
Interesting that he didn't ever want to leave a whole lot of blank spaces. He tried to fill every corner with something. Interesting man. He and his wife had 7 children. Oh, I was telling you about the Governor General in his reception room. When people came, ambassadors from other countries came to Rideau Park to receive things from the Governor General, he would be standing in front of a Norval Morrisseau painting. So he got to see some Canadian native art right off the bat. So the next one, we're down in the Maritimes now, some folk art. This is by a woman by the name of Maud Lewis. Maud Lewis had rheumatoid arthritis. She was just a little bit of a woman, not even 5 feet tall. Had a very interesting eye for the local scenery. Couldn't go very far from her doorway. She was born just outside of Yarmouth, Nova Scotia. lived in a very tiny little house with her husband, who was a fish salesman. People treasured her house to the point where they actually took it after she died and put it in the art gallery in Halifax.
Oh, really?
So if you go to Halifax and you go to the art gallery, you'll not only see her work, but you'll see the charming little house where she did most of the work and where she lived for a good number of years. It's intriguing.
I almost think that we've been on that lake, Mom.
It's I was going to say kind of a Grandma Moses kind of thing, but definitely this is Canada. This is nowhere else but Canada. So that's a folk art interpretation. And then we have an artist who actually came from Peggy's Cove.
Oh, really?
Yep. His name is William de Garth, and he was actually born in Denmark, but came to Canada in his teens and lived in Peggy's Cove. This is the famous blue nose. And you have to go to Lunenburg if you want to see the blue nose.
Sails completely filled with wind.
If you're fortunate and it's not foggy or too rough, you can go out for a ride. I've never managed to do that. I have been aboard the Blue Nose when it was tied up with the tall ships in Halifax Harbor.
It looks smaller than I would think it is or was.
Well, it is not a big, it is, what do they call them, a schooner rather than it's just got the 2 masts, whereas more of the tall ships have 3 masts, but it's beautiful.
Yep.
It used to be on our 5 cent, on our nickel. I don't think we've had it the last few pictures, but anyway, his home in Peggy's Cove is now a gallery, and beside the house, there's a natural outcropping of rock. And one of his very last works, he did a sculpture on those rocks, a memorial to the people of Peggy's Cove, the fishermen. And people will stop and admire that sculpture. It's fairly long. I think it must stretch about 8 feet into the natural rock that's sort of, I guess, trying to think, 4 feet high, maybe. I'm not sure.
Right.
I walked along there and looked at it and didn't realize that the man that did the beautiful paintings was actually the sculptor of that memorial to the people of Peggy's Cove. So that's another view of Canada involving boats and water. Now, how many other pictures do we have of boats? You've at least one. Oops, we've got Ken Danby first. We're talking Canada. We're not talking city, but we're talking realism, and we're talking hockey. Brian, if it's going to be Canada, you've got to have some bit of hockey, right?
No question.
All right, this is realism. But again, it's a slightly different kind of realism. This is a moment in a game. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, but look at the intensity of that goalie. Isn't that
exactly? Yeah. This is not just posed for a picture. He is playing the game, and he's waiting for the shot to come, and he's, as you say, intensity. The posture. Ken Danby has sort of narrowed his view down to just exactly what he needs. Parts of the goal, the stick. Gorgeous picture. He did a couple of series of goalies. He did a couple of series of buses.
You can even see his eyes.
Yeah.
Staring straight at you or at the puck.
The coloring of it is good. Better than it shows in the slide. All right, what do we got next? We're going to go now to Newfoundland. This is Mary Pratt. Mary Pratt was a student of Colville's at Mount A, and she learned a lot from him. What she did was photo realism. And she made no bones about it, that she worked from colored transparencies. But her emphasis has been always on light and how light gives you the texture of things. And her attention to detail is just extraordinary. If you look at the rim of the glass bowl, you'll see a few little droplets of water, and
Yep.
each one has caught the light. And you can sort of sense the texture of the apple just by the way the skin is gleaming on the side of the cut apple.
Oh, it makes me want to bite into it so badly.
She and her husband, Christopher Pratt, separated in the 90s, 92, I think. He must have been very difficult to live with because he kind of made fun of her work. He said she was caught in the kitchen. She made pictures of a salmon on a sheet of plastic ready to go into the oven. She made pictures of jelly, things that a few roses picked from her garden in a crystal vase, all things around the home, but beautifully colored. And as I say, the detail and the attention to light and the way light can filter through glass or crystal, just uncanny.
Now, why does this speak about Canada to you? Just because she's Canadian or because of the harvest or what?
Well, apples are Canada. I don't know. I thought this was typically Canadian.
Okay, good.
And then we go to Christopher Pratt.
The difficult guy.
And he was very, I would say, introspective. Although when I saw this, I thought of driving through Newfoundland and staying at bed and breakfast and all the sheets flapping in the wind outside.
Yep.
And how lovely it is to sleep on sheets that are being dried outside in the fresh air.
Right.
None of this in the dryer kind of thing. This is actually a silkscreen print. Newfoundland doesn't have an awful lot of trees. It does have wind, though.
It sure doesn't look like any trees.
He doesn't need to put people in it. He's got the sheets blowing in the breeze instead. Very few shadows. The houses do look slightly three-dimensional, but he's not made any attempt to give the picture a real depth. A lot of his paintings involve highways, cottages, but there's no real feeling that you can sort of step into them. We're removed from them. It's something that we can look at, but we can't get into it. It's not somehow realism of that type where you say, yes, I could be in this picture.
Yep. Well, I could, on his wife's picture, I could imagine eating the apple. On this one, I couldn't imagine being on that field.
No, in Mary's pictures, you could reach out and touch the apple.
Yeah.
Well, here, this is almost a dreamlike kind of sequence.
But does this remind you of Newfoundland?
But it reminded me of Newfoundland. I enjoyed it. I've been there twice, and I enjoyed it very much. So what have you got after this?
My favorite one. I have this hanging above my fireplace in my living room.
I do too. Thompson's Canoe. Now, the group of seven. I could have shown you all kinds of pictures by the group of seven, but I tried to limit it. Thompson actually had no formal art training. His training rather was in design, but he spent at least one summer, possibly 2 summers, in the Algonquin Park area with Lauren Harris. And he learned a lot from Lauren Harris. And he taught Lauren Harris quite a lot too. When he wasn't working at design in Toronto for the wintertime, he was up working as a guide and fisherman in Algonquin Park. This could even be Canoe Lake where he died. he never managed to exhibit with the group of seven because he died mysteriously in a canoe accident in 1917. And they didn't exhibit as a group until 1920, I think was their first exhibit.
Oh, and when you say mysteriously, it was like no information?
Well, he was an expert canoeist, one would wonder. Some people thought for years that he'd been murdered. Some people thought, well, his feet were tangled up in a fishing line in the canoe. He hit very rough water all of a sudden and wasn't prepared for it. Who knows?
Well, I've been on Canoe Lake, and I was maybe not an expert canoeist, but a reasonably good canoeist, and I capsized along with a bunch of other people, and we had to be saved by
But look at the technique.
It's beautiful.
That tree that's sort of right in the very center is just kind of a scrolly dab of color.
Yep.
Kind of a goldy swoosh. Now the canoe is there. It's right in the foreground, but we're kind of kept back from it. And this was a technique that the group of seven often used. There's a tree or a branch or something that's kind of keeping you a little bit remote from getting into the picture. And he's giving you a real feeling of depth, partly by the color of the water. It seems to be very, very light in the far distance, and then all of a sudden you've got a dark, dark shore beyond it.
Gorgeous. I love it.
You can almost feel yourself paddling in that water.
Oh, no question.
Again, the group of seven, go back and think about the very, very first picture that I showed you. I said, you want to contrast what was being done in Europe with the way Canadians said, no, we want to show Canada as a different scene. It's a very, very different country. And this was what we particularly love.
Right.
The wilderness, no sign of a cabin or a motorboat, just a canoe in the wilderness.
Have you canoed on Canoe Lake?
I have. I've camped in Algonquin Park.
Looks
Beautiful
like a
country, beautiful country.
Looks like a nice cedar strip canoe too. And what's our last one?
Our last one takes us to Georgian Bay. Varley, another member of the group of seven, and he said when he painted it, or after he painted it, that it was actually in memory of his friend Tom Thompson. And it's very much Tom Thompson's style.
Yep.
But I wanted you to see this, Brian, because this year, commemorating the 100th anniversary of the group of seven, Canada Post has brought out a series of stamps. And this is the one that they picked to illustrate Varley's work. It's gorgeous. The wind and the pine tree, the water, the sky, motion, that almost impressionistic technique, fresh air, wind.
Well, I can picture us in Blind Bay at Kilbear Provincial Park up on a rocky cliff with this wind and tree and Georgian Bay in front of us.
So that's sort of a quick trip across Canada from a lot of different artists' points of view.
So let's review them one last time, okay?
Okay.
So what's this one?
This is Little Girls on the Hillside in France, springtime. This is Emily Carr's Sky. This is Lauren Harris's Maligne Lake in the mountains, Jasper. This is Alex Janvier from Cold Lake, Alberta, but this is actually in the Museum of History in Gatineau. This is Curlick, a Manitoba party.
Alex Colville.
This is Alex Colville. I think this is just called On the Beach. And Colville again, the Hound. Greg Canoe, north of London. And Jack
Chambers. 401.
401 outside of London. Norval Morisot, the great, what's
Eagle.
this one called, the great bird or something?
The Great Eagle.
Great eagle with a fish inside it. Maud Lewis from
All
Yarmouth,
seen
Nova
with fear.
Scotia. Folk art. William DeGarth from Nova Scotia, Blue Nose. Ken Danby
At the crease.
at the crease. Mary Pratt, apples,
Glassy apples.
glassy apples. And Christopher Pratt,
The clothes.
sheets, just called sheets.
Tom Thompson, the Canoe, my favorite of them all. And then the last one.
Varley, Georgian Bay.
Well, Mom, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for this description. We really appreciate it.
Now, those are not necessarily all my favorite pictures, but they're sort of a representative scattering across Canada.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that show of paintings that speak about Canada to you for Canada Day. Happy Canada Day to you, and happy Canada Day to anyone that's listening or watching the show.
Hope by next year we can actually do some traveling on Canada Day.
Oh gosh, don't I hope it. Don't I hope it. The Brian Crombie Show is on Canada One TV once a week, and you can get all my shows on my website, www.briancrombie.com/videocasts. And as I said, my mom, Flora Crombie, has done a couple shows for me that are all available there. We've done the first show on art appreciation. The second show was Art of Easter. The third show was art about mothers for Mother's Day. And now today, art that speaks about Canada. Mom, Flora Crombie, thank you so much for this real gift on Canada Day to us. Happy Canada Day.
Thank you, Brian. Happy memories.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone. Good night. Hi, I'm Brian Crombie, and we're going to be talking on the Brian Crombie Show. We're going to be talking about politics, arts, business, and social issues on the Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV.